Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us and for tuning into this live event. My name is Melvin Adams. I'm the founder and president of Noah Webster Educational Foundation. We are an organization committed to reclaiming America's education and culture through foundational principles and best practices. Now, I'm joined tonight by a select panel, each with experience and perspective on our topic. Tonight, we'll be discussing hot-button issues surrounding schools and how they should or shouldn't handle our children. We'll be talking about transparency issues and whether or not they should promote sexuality. Because of recent trends, we will especially focus on transsexuality. Now, I represent Noah Webster Educational Foundation as the moderator on this discussion. Each of our panelists' opinions are their own and do not necessarily reflect the positions of Noah Webster. Members of our audience, we invite you to join the conversation as well tonight. You can submit questions in the comment box there in the Facebook thread under the live stream, or you may do so by submitting texts to 877-322-NWEF. That's 877-322-NWEF. And we'd love to hear from you tonight. We will be going through a series of questions that have already been prepared by our staff for the panel. And then following that, we will take questions from our audience tonight. And so thank you for joining us. So tonight, I am joined by three panelists, Kenyon Knapp, Lori Kuykendall, and Thomas Turner. So panelists, please take a minute or two to introduce yourselves. Tell us a little bit about who you are, what you're doing, and especially any background experience you may have with our topic. So let's start it off, Kenyon Knapp.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to share with everyone tonight. My background is that I've been a counseling professor for over 20 years, and I've also been in private practice since 1998. I'm a licensed professional counselor, and in my years of counseling, I've worked with a lot of different issues. I've worked with about 60 different transsexual clients at various levels in the process. I've also served as a school counselor for a number of years. And so that's just a little quick synopsis of my background.
Thank you. Lori?
Good evening. I am glad to be here as well. My background is in health education. I have an undergraduate degree in community health education and later earned my master's in public health and health promotion. Have been in the field of sex education, really abstinence education since 1995. I thought I would set out to be a pediatrician when I headed off to college in 1990. And now you know my age, everyone. But here I am to say I was quickly drawn into the field of prevention and health education, particularly for children. I have a deep love of children, having served in mission work for children and health education in Guatemala and Romania. This particular issue is fairly new, right? It's quickly developing, evolving, changing quickly and constantly for parents and schools. And I'm glad we can dive into addressing some solutions to the problem tonight.
Great. Thomas?
Well, thank you so much, Melvin, and to the Noah Webster Foundation for inviting me to speak. I've been involved in conservative politics for about 12 years, since my graduation from Liberty University in 2012. I've had the opportunity to work on various college campuses, promoting conservative ideas and principles, but I've also had the opportunity to work in my local public school system here in Suffolk, both as a substitute teacher, and now I serve on the Citizens Board for Safety, in which has taught me a lot about transparency. But above all, I'm a member of the LGBTQ community, and I am looking forward to having a great discussion with you all here tonight.
All right. Thank you all. So today, someone sent me a meme, and It was attributed to Bill Maher, but like most things one receives over the internet, it may or may not be true. But the message itself made sense to me. Let me share it with you all, kind of as a preamble to our conversation tonight. This is what it said. If kids knew what they wanted to be at age 8, the world would be filled with cowboys and princesses. I wanted to be a pirate. Thank God nobody took me seriously and scheduled me for eye removal and peg leg surgery. All right. So that's kind of where we kick off here tonight. And so you'll kind of have a sense of where we're going and some of the things we're going to be talking about. Let's start off with a few general questions that's open to the whole panel here. First of all, do you believe there is evidence that public education is enabling the transgender movement?
Well, I'm going to jump in by saying public education is one of many voices enabling, to use your word, Melvin, the transgender movement. I think we wouldn't want to give it all of its responsibility. We would want to include it in one of many cultural influences that have shaped and changed the way children think about their sexuality and their identity going forward. It's easy to track along the increasing prevalence of the increasing range of identities for gender and the expressions of that accordingly. But I think a broad brush statement to place on schools is a little bit tricky, but public education will always have a role in shaping our kids. And we want to make sure we're thinking through the partnership with parents and appropriate policies that would protect our children. And that looks different everywhere. As we know, public schools are locally controlled, and most of the curriculum decisions and policy decisions happen at the local level. So we're going to have a range across the thousands of school districts in the nation. But I don't know that I answered directly your question, but brought in, I think, what is quite a few of the complex issues here around this topic.
All right. So I think the key word in the question is, do you believe there is evidence?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that. I'm speaking to you now from Virginia. And in Virginia 2 years ago, there was House Bill 145 and Senate Bill 161. And they were promoting the quote unquote model policies for the treatment of transgender students in public, elementary, and secondary schools. And the state Department of Education was pushing local school districts to adopt this. And it was a very slanted, one-sided approach to the whole issue of transsexualism, meaning that the referrals they had within the documents were only to organizations that were affirming of transsexualism if a person felt any confusion at all about their sexual attractions or gender identity and so forth. And so in Virginia, at least, there was a definite push towards this. Now, there's been some change in politics in the state of Virginia in the last year or so, and that's sort of slowed this down a little bit. But there's a number of other states like Virginia that have similar House and Senate bills where the State Department of Education is pushing specific curriculums about transsexualism. Many times parents object to that. And you're seeing that all across the country in the national media where parents are standing up and mobilizing and going to school board meetings, not just in Loudoun County, Virginia, which is getting a lot of national media attention, but in a lot of districts across the country. And a lot of the parents are saying they want to convey their thoughts about this to their children themselves, not have the public school district share their thoughts on it.
Thomas, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I do. I actually want to add a little bit. I'm from the Hampton Roads area of Virginia, and I actually was exposed to a book called Gender Queer, and I was just flabbergasted that it was actually in a school. It depicted very inappropriate. I won't go into detail out of respect for the group, but it was very inappropriate, depicting sexual acts, and I was just like, why is that in school? It looked like porn. It was pornography. And it was probably one of the most disturbing things I've ever seen, in my life. So to answer the question, I would say yes and no, because it does vary on locality. But if schools are allowing books like that, that does concern me. That why is that being exposed to minors, especially if parents are not being told about it. So that's just my thoughts on that.
So, and Thomas, maybe you want to start off a response to this next observation or question, if you're comfortable with that. So there's, when we start talking about transgender, I mean, there's everything from, you might call it playing trans, like, cross dressing and drag. And, we're seeing, drag queens come and read to the kids in the library. And, recently in the news, parents took their kids out to a bar and the drag queens, they were dancing and tipping the drag queens and things like that. And then there's that actual promoting and actually doing the sexual transition therapy. So, I mean, in other words, it's not a one size fits all issue. There's a lot involved here at differing degrees. Would you agree?
Yeah, I actually would agree to an extent, Melvin. I think what we're seeing here is that we're seeing, for example, I'll just start with the drag queen shows. I was actually sent something on a YouTube video from Blue's Clues. I don't know if y'all are familiar with Blue's Clues. It was a Nick Jr. show, and it had a pride parade, which I'm like, okay. I've been to many pride fests, and I personally go to these events, and I was like, okay, well, I'll just watch for see how it goes. And it started off talking about some families have two parents of the same sex, and I went, okay. I don't know if parents want their kids to see that, but that didn't really bother me. But it started getting really deep into the pansexual, bisexual facets, and that was starting to disturb me. And then they had this what looked to be, as you were saying earlier, a drag queen, like making it sound like they were like using like kind of like one of the marching songs from the Civil War period, and they like modified it to like make it seem like this is like a quote unquote normal thing to be talking about, having multiple sexual partners, multiple types of orientation. And I'm like, while I do believe that these discussions should happen, while I do believe that we should be talking about this, I think it should be at the appropriate age. And 4 years old is not the appropriate age. It's disturbing that we're seeing this being pushed onto children because, quite honestly, biologically, they're not ready for it. What we should be talking about with 4-year-olds is how to share and how to treat people kindly and how to respect their parents, not this whole concept of are you pan, are you bisexual? Like they haven't even hit puberty yet. So it's like scientifically they just haven't, and so that concerns me. While again, if they're 18 and they're approaching adulthood and they want to go attend these type of events, that's perfectly fine. But I really have a problem, and then I've had this problem, and it's been that we're seeing such a push at such an early age on these type of issues. It's actually getting very scary. And I don't mean to prolong, but going into the drag shows, I actually, at first, when I heard this, I was like, there is no way that, because I've been to numerous drag shows, I would not want anyone under a minor there. It is not, it's kind of like, in essence, like going to, I would say, not necessarily a strip bar, but it's kind of like an environment for adults to make those personal decisions where they want to attend this or not. And just because of the type of dancing and the music and the environment overall, that could be a little bit, that exposure shouldn't be to a child yet. That's just my opinion on the subject.
Thank you, Thomas. Anybody else want to weigh in briefly on that?
One thing I might add is even just some clarity around what is very complex and confusing and controversial. I usually kind of say those 3 C's pretty quickly together. Even defining terms is tricky. And you think about how does this translate in a classroom setting to children? Well, if the adults can't agree, on clarity and definition, then certainly the children, we can't pass that on clearly to children. So I think it kind of follows along this idea of what do we teach in a classroom for children? And given the complexity of definitions, even, and one thing I like to do in this discussion is differentiate between gender identity and sexual orientation, two very different concepts. I usually say gender identity first because it's going to typically be a smaller, younger child dealing with identity issues, where sexual orientation becomes more of a behavior issue. And then we also differentiate down between feelings and behaviors and identities. There's sort of this whole grid to even give us a framework to discuss these difficult topics. But I think that children need objectivity and clarity and things we can agree on and have been founded in science. And certainly the ideology of this expanding list of identities is quite confusing to children, and I think gives them a sense of insecurity or doesn't provide the safety that they need.
Yeah. You know, as I was trying to prepare for today, I was thinking, and so I've got a question I'm going to throw out here. It might be a bomb. I don't intend for it to be necessarily, but I think we need to think seriously. And the question I have, is a society that advocates for mutilation a healthy one? Let's start with the doctor.
All right. Well, thank you. And I apologize for the internet problems we had here for a second. A little bit of devil's in the details of technology. To your question about mutilating, I find it disturbing, and I should say the mental health field is divided on this issue. There are some people that consider it, the only appropriate way is to be affirming of children who feel confusion about their identity, gender identity, and that if they feel that they're a boy but they have a girl's biological body, we should just affirm the way they feel. Let me speak as a mental health professional for a second. I mentioned at the beginning of this, I worked with about 60 transsexual clients over my career. A very high percentage of my clients with transsexual feelings had a sexual abuse history. And a common side effect of sexual abuse, especially in young children, is confusion about their gender identity. And so the clients I worked with were then told that if you feel that you're a female, if you're biologically a male, or vice versa, that that's just who you are. And I would meet with them and I would say, well, is there any possibility that your sexual abuse history, which we've talked about, could have any implications or relevance to your current identity feelings? And the clients would often say yes, but the advocates in the organizations would say, heck no. and they would just try to say whatever you feel is who you are, and feelings dictate reality. But many of my clients and many mental health professionals I know believe that a lot of transsexual feelings are really just a delusion, and that a lot of the mental health fields are just abdicating their responsibility in helping clients by only affirming confused feelings that children feel because of a sexual abuse history.
Mm-hmm.
I'll jump in on thinking of education. Where else in education do we go with feelings first? If you feel that 2 + 3 is 4, well, great, we'll go with that, right? Like we teach objectivity in other areas of education. And this particular one seems to be leaning towards feelings and subjectivity instead. And I think that's problematic inherently also.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think the aspect of mutilation, I think it goes back to development. When we're talking about these decisions, like I spoke a little bit earlier, I don't know if a 5-year-old can make that decision. I personally just don't. However, I do know when you get to that development age, which is, I'm not a doctor, but it's usually in your 20s, from my basic understanding of biology, that you're in adulthood. When you can make those decisions and go through the process of who you if you want to go down that road to transitioning. It does worry me because there's some biological, I'll go a little deeper, hormone replacement therapy and other things that could hinder a child's development. And I think that a lot of my friends who are in the LGBTQ community on the left don't really think about that. It's not really necessarily a question of, how can, you don't accept them because they have said to be trans. I'd say that's absolutely not true. It's just a question of there are some biological milestones that have to happen, bone development and other things that you really need to think about here. And I know the good doctor who's probably had that discussion numerous times, probably with younger clients, and especially with their parents. It's like that's what we really need to be thinking about here. And I'm not saying no transgender that I'm not taking I disagree a little bit with the concept of that it's maybe a in the head type of thing, but I think that we really need to be mindful of the fact that a child versus an adult. And I think that's where the premise of tonight is. So that's just my thoughts.
Can I piggyback on what Thomas was saying? He's making great points there about development. I'll put this up here real quick in the screen where people can see. This is Jean Piaget's cognitive development chart here. And you see on the bottom, when they reach about 12 years old, they reach a stage of formal operational thinking. And a lot of us learn this in intro to psychology class and things like that. And what it talks about is that kids cognitively can't process abstract ideas like gravity and centrifugal force and things like that until they at least get to 12 years old. And Thomas is right. People keep developing cognitively into their mid-20s. And we know that as a society, and we apply it in so many other ways. Like when you take, for example, the average age to get your driver's license is 16 in many states. Voting age is often 18. Drinking age is often 21 years old. And so we have all these different ages set that are meant to let people make decisions where they're capable to make logical and fully informed decisions. But yet when it comes to sexuality and transsexualism, people are trying to remove those barriers and those safeguards. And I know that the argument could be made, well, if you don't do it by a certain age, their body is going to develop into secondary sex characteristics and puberty and so forth, and you get past the age where you could change it. Well, that might be true physically, but the thing is, if you force children to make these decisions at a young age, it's forcing a decision on them that they're not ready for. And that's why many people, educators, psychologists, others, refer to this as child abuse. Because when you make a child make a decision that they really can't make, that's unethical.
A few months ago, I was down at our Capitol. I'm in Texas, so down at the Austin Capitol and working on several issues similar to these and related. And I saw a little girl go into the Capitol with her mother that morning in a little dress and shoes. And she went with her mother. And it was about 4:00 that afternoon after several hours of testimony where I saw that little girl, who was actually a little boy, about 8 years old, walk up to the podium holding the hand of his mother and introduce themselves and read a script, that someone I'm sure had written for him to read. And two thoughts came into my head. First of all, I'm sorry, he said something like, this is not child abuse. This is what I need because I was born in the wrong body. A similar theme we've heard throughout of, children born in the wrong body. And I had two thoughts. First of all, who told you that? I think the power of suggestion and attention and social media and a lot of those ideas, and parents even along there, like, who told you that? My second thought was simply, how do we help this young person not be afraid? What a scary thought to be born in the wrong body when you're 8 years old. I think affirming their identity and their created value and inherent worth are really important ideas for small children. Like I said, I just thought about that idea of wrong body. What a scary thought to be walking around living in the wrong body as a small person.
Yeah. Well, this is a great discussion. We need to push on, though, because we want to get more into the schools and what's going on and so forth. So, Dr. Knapp mentioned a little bit ago about some of the laws that were pushed through here in Virginia a couple of years ago, and that's there are changes that are trying to take place. But we know that this kind of thing is going on across the country. I know that I was reached out to by a group of parents and citizens in Fairfax County looking for some talking points and some things to share with their board there, trying to convince them that the most important thing for them to be doing was not to be focusing on what their pronoun policy was going to be, but how we could actually make sure that the children were getting a proper education. And so there's a strong push for this in schools across the country to really focusing on pronoun policies and where kids can have, pick their pronoun names and so forth. And I mean, now it's out into the workforce and the whole culture is soaking it up. But how important is this to the education of our children? And is there clear data that demonstrates its value?
Are we speaking specifically about pronoun policy, just to
Correct.
clarify the question?
Correct. Thank you.
Well, I think it's a slippery slope, as they would say, when we base policy back on my word of subjectivity and feelings. Public policy should be objective and uphold the greater good of all. And when we're talking about classrooms, that's very different than a clinical or individual scenario, right? So you've got to think classroom wise. We use words like inclusive. Well, usually inclusive tends to mean exclusive of some groups. When we can uphold the value and worth and respect of every child, when we can set policies that are objective, if a child wants to be, considered to be an elephant one day and a horse the next day, we don't just kind of roll with that. We have a policy that upholds their given name and can also affirm their biological sex based on their birth certificate if needed. But I think, as you've said, the attention towards this ideology has taken away from other important education priorities. And it's taken away from the partnership back with parents as well.
Yeah. And so then that kind of folds into another question. Is it the proper role or responsibility of school boards and employees of our schools to give guidance to students on matter of gender preferences, transition, and other concepts that should be addressed by parents and the counselor or healthcare provider of their choice? And a quick follow-up on that, should schools enforce disciplinary action if staff or students do not adhere to an individual's preferred pronouns?
I don't mind jumping in on this, if you don't mind, Melvin. I think the punishment part, no. I have a lot of friends that are trans. I actually have a couple of friends that recently have gone through the process. It's going to take time to get used to that. And oftentimes, 9 times out of 10, they're not offended. It's only the small, minute, militant, far left types that make a big deal out of it, just because they want to make a scene or make think they're being a political martyr, which is kind of almost a farce of the trans movement to me. I have hung out with many of my friends who are trans, and when I speak to them, and they prefer to be called he instead of she or whatever. They're not like, Thomas, you evil human being. So I just wanted to put it out. But when it gets into the classroom, I think that the question shouldn't be that. I think it should be talking about general disrespect and bullying to LGBTQ students. I think that's where we really should be talking about. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier with younger children. We should just be talking about how to treat people with kindness and respect, even if you may disagree. I think that that's where we need to get at, more so than punishing someone. Say, "Oh, I refuse to call you what you are because it's not what I see you as or whatever. I think that the first step is, how do we address in general, not just trans, but LGBTQ students in high schools or in schools in general? And what is the best method? Because unfortunately, there's going to be instances of bullying and other things across the board. And I think that protecting students' safety is more important than calling them he, she, they, them, or what have you.
Right. Right. I agree with that fully. Yeah. Anybody else?
I'll say this: as the younger generation is so involved with social media, one characteristic about them is they're much more in tune with social desirability. They all like to have likes on their Instagram or whatever other social media they're using, TikTok, whatever, and they're very attuned to trying to be accepted per se by their social group.
Mhm.
And part of what's going on right now is a lot of what I would say is coercion in regards to speech, in regards to pronouns. I don't see so much that many districts per se that are pushing the whole pronoun thing as a district per se, but it's more so individual teachers and so forth, and certain people who are real hardcore advocates for certain perspectives. I mean, it got some media attention recently in Wisconsin when there were a bunch of eighth grade boys that were charged with a Title IX violation for allegedly mispronouncing the preferred pronouns of other students. And when they're charging a person with a Title IX violation, that's like a severe legal threat against a person, and that gets into coercion. And where it bothers me is that I think for a lot of these people, transsexualism, I believe, is a delusion. But then when you force it on the general public that you have to agree with them, you have to use the words they want, it's almost forcing a shared psychotic disorder. And I don't mean psychotic as in schizophrenia and so forth, but psychotic meaning being out of touch with reality. And if your body is biologically this or that, that's just what it is. And I'm not saying it has to be or should be, or it just is. And these people want to believe otherwise. And when you threaten them with legal action, it becomes coercion. And that's a lot of the stress that people are feeling around this issue right now, and that youth are feeling with social desirability.
So let's dig into that a little bit more. I mean, what's the solution? Are there solutions and for kids and for parents and even for educators out there? Because I know teachers who are caught in the middle of this. And it's like, they're torn because they want to do a good job. They want to really give those kids the best they have. But, there are so many little nuances, and it's like, okay, it's, you can't do it right. Lori?
Well, I certainly don't have the quick solution to doing it right and recognizing the complexity of it all. But I think it comes back to a couple of levels in terms of working with teachers and with parents with the children that they have in front of them every day. I think there's two parts to that. Parents need to communicate their values, dialogue about their values, process their values in their home every day.
Right.
Because it's not just what the children will learn at school, it's what they'll learn from social media and learn from their peers and learn from other kinds of influences in their life. So certainly want to uphold parents in passing on clearly their values on these topics. And then as far as teachers go, certainly there are going to be systemic policies that you will have to make a value decision on if you're going to submit to them or act differently and bring the ramifications that follow, risk those ramifications as well. I think that's different. But there's so much to this that comes down to looking at it at an individual case by case basis and navigating through the sticky, messy decisions that are around these issues with a great sense of compassion. I think it's hard to come in black and white. We've got to kind of meet people where they are, listen a lot more, and then be able to really love people where they are, support people where they are. And so I talk about looking at individual scenarios. We mentioned a sexual abuse history. There can be all kinds of reasons and influences that brought this person to this point at this moment. Then there are relational issues. What allows me to maintain relationship, whether it's a family member or a student or a coworker. Relationships are really important. And then I think Dr. Knapp's already referenced some of the psychological, or I would say intellectual, the just complexities around true diagnoses that are often brushed over with a quick solution of here's hormones. I love one of the advocacy groups has the motto, help, not hormones, that it's become such an easy fix to today, all of today's problems. And it's just not that simple. So I think we've got to tread carefully, tread compassionately, and seek wisdom as well. A lot of these decisions need to be thought through, that not just what this decision is, but the decisions that will follow accordingly. If you go down social transition, are you going to go down that track, for example, towards future medication and possible surgery? When you think policies, if we're going to accommodate this group, are we going to accommodate that group, this group, that group, or this group? When we begin to differentiate people by their particular characteristics, it gets really messy in a hurry. So I would use a lot of caution and seek very specific situational solutions that are based on objectivity where possible.
Mm-hmm. Thomas, you have anything you want to add?
I do. I agree with Lori on the concept of parents are going to have to take the role of the foundation of what values they want their children to have. But it is a weird balance because I was actually talking to a liberal teacher, and he's part of the LGBTQ community, and we obviously differ on these issues a lot. But he was saying, and just to throw out there, and I will, and he was saying something that he's had students that he's identified as has been abused because they've said that they are experiencing, that they, are maybe trans or gay or what have you, and they're getting abused at home, which that's also not healthy. And I think as we dive deeper into this, there has to be a facet, because I don't want to take away from the rights of parents. But there has to be some balance where teachers can step in, because as you were saying, Melvin, they want to protect their kids. I'm blessed in my conservative activism to work with a lot of teachers who are generally very conservative. And, they really just want to help their kids. And when they see these problems, we have to find a healthy legal balance. I think what's happening in our schools is that parents have been taken out of the process. And we saw that, and I don't mean to get too deep into the situation that happened in Loudoun with the situation of the person who purported themselves as trans, and they weren't. And they ended up being almost, in essence, kind of a serial rapist, and which that's disturbing. And the school hid it. I know we're going to dive into that. I don't mean to jump ahead, but I think that leads into a transparency issue. I sit on the safety audit committee, and you'd be amazed with the lack of information that is not shared with parents on safety in general. Safety in general. It has been a fight of mine for 2 years, and it's frustrating when I see, why are you not sharing that this is happening? Why did you not share that there was a fight where someone was bringing, or a 6-year-old's bringing X, Y, and Z, or why wasn't this brought up? And they're like, the superintendent doesn't allow that. And I said, I'm sorry, since when does he get unilateral authority to do that? So, I think that we have to really discuss a balance here, a healthy balance. And it is complicated, and forgive me for blaming, but I do want to echo what Lori was saying, that fundamentally, though, parents, have to instill those values. 99.999% of them are going to do it the right way. But we also have to be prepared for those rare moments where we have bad apples who are not going to be able to help their kids, whether they agree or disagree with their decision, as they go through the process of their sexuality or their orientation. That teachers have identifying ways that they can step in and help legally. That's just my thoughts.